First thing I want to do, I hate to disrupt you, but I'd like you to stand up. So stand up where you are, put your things down on the table. And I'd like you to face the people at your table, and then as fast as you can, clap your hands like this. Okay, all right, good, good. Then you can go ahead and sit down, and I want you to say you went to AI CPA and got a standing ovation. Because what it takes to suit up and do your jobs every day is worth that, for sure. And it's my great privilege to be here with you. You know, I have kind of an interesting past. First of all, being cleanup hitter for the conference, Elaine will appreciate this, my old softball buddy from 30 years ago. There's a lot of pressure. It's like, this better be good. You know, you're supposed to like hit it over the fence, bring in the runs, and send them all home happy. But it all started actually with growing up in a family in rural part of California with 3 older brothers. And so in my life, I didn't have any gender discrimination. It was everybody had an equal shot at a second helping of meatloaf if you got your hand in the table. And being the youngest of them, I always wanted to have playmates, but I could only play with them if I played sports or cowboys and Indians. That was our 2 main things. And I could only play with them if I was good enough to play, because they didn't want a weak link on the team. So most of my life was a lot of proficiency, gaining proficiency in a lot of different sports. I was a national record holder in the Junior Olympics. I was a state tennis champion in singles and doubles. I had all these different awards and things. So by the time I got to high school, I was a junior in high school, I went to the guidance counselor to find out about getting a scholarship for college. We didn't have much money, and she told me that there weren't any sports scholarships for girls. And I was like stunned. I said, "What do you mean? My brothers are all eligible for sports." She goes, "Yeah, but there aren't any for girls." So I went ahead and self-funded myself through college and spent 4 years fighting for Title IX, which we passed the year I graduated. So a lot of girls got the benefit of that, but it was my first real introduction to gender inequality. Fast forward, I graduated from school, I got a teaching job, but my real passion was professional softball. So I went into professional softball. And once again, I hit this situation where the players, we out on the field, we were the product. We were what people paid to come see, and we were very good and all that. And the men were the owners, and they would regularly meet with us and tell us why they couldn't pay us because of, whatever back office expenses were, which was basically their compensation. So, so a fair amount of my life was spent kind of just shaking my head about it didn't make sense, this whole gender inequality. So about 30 years ago, I decided to do something about it. I started the Institute for Women's Leadership, and my initial foray into that, by the way, I don't have a clicker, and I'm going to need that. Oh, here, okay, great. Yeah, so I knew from the different kinds of studies that I had done that you couldn't just empower women and crack the code on whatever this gender inequality thing was, that there were different aspects of it. So I kind of immersed myself in trying to understand, what's the marriage between the demand in the marketplace and the demand from individual women and the engagement of men. And so I've spent all of these decades now in that space. And that's why I say when you have 2 men like Bob and Dave up here, and they are the kind of leaders they are, that is as good as it gets. I mean, you should all hope that every one of your leaders embodies the authenticity and the commitment that they demonstrated up here. So I'm going to walk you through some things, but I also realized from yesterday that you're a feisty group. And you like questions, and you like to mix it up, and you like to get into Q&A. So we're going to leave lots of time for that. So bear with me as I kind of burn through some slides here. So I've got good news and I've got bad news. The good news is that we are going to own the marketplace. That's what's happening in the world of college education. So that's all, the green line represents all associate degrees, bachelor degrees, master degrees, and PhDs in the United States of America over a 50-year period. The green line represents women. The red line represents men, graduates. So I'll let you be with that a little bit. It's a little bit stunning for male executives when I show them this slide. The last part of the slide that represents the gray area is what you'd call the grain of America. And you actually already have that in your fabulous AICPA brochure, where it talks here about 78 million baby boomers will retire in the next 17 years. That's because 10,000 of us are turning 65 every day. Every day, 10,000. So Gen Xers, 50 million will be prepared to fill those slots, but oops, that's 28 million unaccounted for. So what are we as a country going to do with that talent gap? Well, it bodes very well for women, may I just say, based on this slide. It's also going to give us a chance to be very selective about what companies deserve the privilege of having our talent. And that's an important thing. Mary pointed at this notion of, what does it mean to be on your terms? What are your terms for how the workplace has to work for you? And that's something I think we're not used to because we've been in the, difficult positions that we've been in, but it is something that we can now start to claim and start to think about is, how would I have it be on my terms so that I can have... I just don't like the concept of not having it all. I just don't. I can't live with it. I can't be with it. Because I've always had it all. And I've had it on my own terms, and I've had to kind of wiggle and bob and weave and all kinds of things to make adjustments. But I think the notion that we can't puts us in a position of what's the best we can hope for. And that's just not a context that I would want you to move forward in, especially the younger ones of you. We've got like 4 or 5 generations in this room of women leaders. It's mind-boggling. I also forgot to say, and we should take a moment to say this, men of quality are never threatened by women's equality. So let's hear it for the guys in the room. Okay, so as Bob said, we shouldn't have to make a business case, but there's such a ridiculous amount of research on the business case. I mean, just volumes and volumes and volumes of statistics like this that show gender balanced teams, companies with women leaders in their board of directors and their executive teams all outperform all the other company by every measure. So the business case is in. The bad news is that we come in at these numbers that you've heard about for the last 2 days, and by the time we get to the executive, the colander is kicked in. So we're losing the talent in the middle of the pipeline there, and we end up with these very skinny numbers up at the top of the house, which according to Sheryl Sandberg, I was with her a couple weeks ago, she said it'll take somewhere between 50 and 100 years to reach parity. Well, as someone who's got a daughter who's 28, who I looked in her beautiful brown eyes when she was a baby and said, honey, even though I didn't have it during my lifetime, I'm going to fix this for you. And now she's 28, and those are the statistics. And she's got little Brinley, who's 10 months, who I looked into her eyes and said, honey, on my watch, we're going to fix this. So I'm not going down until that goes up. That's where I stand with it. So this whole area of gender partnership is very complex. We'll get into some of the nuances of it that make it something, if it was easy, would have solved it before now. And I'm of the view that at 2015, thinking back to whenever it was 1968, when I was in my counselor's office, why we're still having this conversation is the whole point of today's discussion, of my talk with you. Is that we're still having it means we haven't got to the source of what's going to change the conversation, what's going to shift the contextual frame of reference for men and women such that we don't have this as our future. So it requires looking at 3 simultaneous forces, if you will. The first one is empowering and supporting women with and for each other. So that work still needs to be done. By the way, I have a little quiz for you. How many of you women in this room have ever been undermined by another woman at work? Would you just raise your hand if you've had it? And look around the room at that experience. Okay. Second question. How many women in this room have ever undermined another woman at work? No hands. No. Oh, one brave soldier. Okay. But therein lies part of the problem. So we got plenty of work to do, and we should keep doing that work. And I've got some ideas for that. A couple of them is that women are in a double bind. They get dinged if they don't speak their accomplishments, and they get dinged if they speak them too powerfully. So we have to speak each other's accomplishments. We have to be each other's braggarts and say, oh, wow, did you see what Sally did? Or, wow, Betsy killed it on that last project. So that's one of the things we can do to help women. Another thing is to, how many of you women have had the experience of being in a meeting and saying something and nobody heard, nobody responded, but then a man repeated it and got credit for it? Just raise your hand if you've had that. Okay, so that's always what it's like. So the next time that happens, your job is to say, and the guys aren't doing it intentionally, for sure. I guarantee you it's not intentional. But it still happens. So here's your job. Next time it happens, go, you know what? Paula, when you first raised that about 10 minutes ago, is that what you were pointing at? Is that what you were kind of wanting to get us to see? You make sure that you take it back to the woman who deserves credit for it. Because if we don't do that, then it goes unnoticed. Or it doesn't go unnoticed. It goes unacknowledged. Then we get in the hallway and we complain about it, which makes no difference. So that's a hot tip. I'll leave you with several hot tips today. I hope you write this down. Anybody who's tweeting, tweet the hot tips, because then other people can get the benefit. Okay, another thing is, real simple thing. When a new woman comes to work in your organization, go meet her. Go by her desk. Leave her a note. Wonderful if you can leave her flowers, but that might be over the top. But at least go by, introduce yourself, say, hey, how would you like to have lunch with me and a couple of my friends? Very, very simple thing to do. But if we don't do that, by omission, we leave people feeling left out or awkward or not included. So again, some simple things to get after the empowering women with and for each other. I'm going to give you a ton of things on the engaging men front. And then the last one is this: identifying and transforming institutional barriers and blind spots. So this condition cannot continue unless there's a lot of things conspiring for it to continue. And by conspiring, I don't mean like the evil empire or, malevolent intention. In fact, it's blind spots. That's why they call it blind. You can't see it. It's in the areas that you don't know. So something like talent reviews. How many of you sit in talent reviews? You're senior enough in the organization that you're part of those talent reviews. Okay, put a very keen filter on your listening in the next round of talent reviews and notice the vocabulary that's used to describe men and women. It's a very simple thing, but if you don't pay attention to it, it'll just go on, and pretty soon they'll say, she's got sharp elbows, but he's a go-getter. And it's the same behavior. We do a lot of work in this space with working with executive teams for them to see and to discover, oh my goodness, we just said we couldn't give her that stretch assignment because she's got young kids. Bill's got young kids, and we didn't say anything about that. So lots of little nuances there. Here's another good one. If you hire a woman and the salary is lower than what the industry standard is, and as one of the stewards of the company's financial responsibility and so forth, you want to be a good steward and all that, give her a hiring bonus. Give her the extra money, or say, look, you didn't ask for this. You only asked for the minimum amount. I'm going to give you, 20% more or something, with a nudge that for the rest of your career, be sure and ask for more. These are little things that we could do that's all part of the inequity that happens over time, but we can intervene in sooner rather than later. And then last thing I would say on that one, just these are kind of a few things that you can get after, is formulate gender-balanced teams. So if you've got account teams, or if you've got problem-solving teams, or innovation teams, or whatever, just start out with making sure they're gender balanced. And I think Bob made a great case about this, is he did that at BC Hydro, and they got way more innovation, way more energy, creativity, etc., because they had this benefit of the different ways the brain works, different ways people solve problems, etc. So there's some low-hanging fruit. Now, speaking of brains, men and women's brains are different. And we kind of know that, but we don't know exactly the depth of the implications of that. Harvard's got an amazing thing called the Decision-Making Lab, and they do a lot of dynamic MRIs, so functional MRIs. So you're actually in a problem-solving situation, and they're tracking your brain, the brain waves, the electrical currents. And they're tracking the difference between where men's brains go and where women's brains go, and what parts of the brain light up when they're doing problem solving. It's completely different. We just have whole different architecture in the way, the amount of gray matter and white matter. We have different vascular system, whereas how much blood goes to that part of the brain, etc. So this whole thing about differences, along with things like hormone. Men have 40 times more testosterone than women. Under stress, their biology does a different thing than ours does. We, on the other hand, are oxytocin machines. You know, the love hormone? Like, we go towards communication, relationship building, etc. Those hormones produce different outcomes in the body and in the way the brain functions. So this notion of 1 + 1 = 3 is making sure that we're optimizing the biology, the socialization, the pure genius of how creativity resides in all of us. And we can only do that if we make sure that we've got gender balanced teams. Now, why aren't more men engaged? So there's a generic cause that explanation that I'm just going to name for you, but if you're really interested, and particularly if you're technical, you might appreciate this. There's a notion called deterministic screens. Deterministic screens is the way human beings formulate reality. And it's based in language and symbols and recognition. So these deterministic screens are literally like a screen goes over your eyes. And we are both uniquely equipped with deterministic screens, meaning that we have screens that are very unique to everything about us that makes us individuals, like our genome, the iris of our eye, our thumbprint. Those are all uniquenesses. Well, our deterministic screens are also ultimately completely unique, like 7.2 billion unique examples. But there are some aspects of deterministic screens that are part of the culture you grow up in. So if you grow up male, you have certain screens. If you grow up female, you have certain screens. Ethnicity is another area where you have certain kinds of screens. So the role of the screens is to notice what's familiar and move towards it, and notice what's unfamiliar and move away from it. And how you know a deterministic screen is at work is when you have uneasiness. So, men live in a culture of deterministic screens that has certain recognition around familiarity and unfamiliarity. And they move towards that. So that's the part of it where they can't do anything about it unless they have awareness, unless they have some of the awakening that the previous panel talked about. So they literally don't see the issue. Now, friends, I just want to say, I have been at this a really long time. I have been at this longer than some of you are of age in the room. Okay, that's how long. It boggles my mind every time I discover a group of men that don't get it. It boggles my mind. It's like, it's 2015, you can't not get it. But they actually don't get it. They really don't. It's not ill-intended, it's not mean-spirited, it's just they literally don't get it. So this thing about not seeing the issue because they don't experience it. One of the ways One of the ways I'm going to share with you that has been very humbling for me recently, I've been trying to find how do I put myself in a situation that's like it is for men, where I'm oblivious or uninvolved or something. What do I do? And let me tell you what I found. It's a question that I asked myself. And it wasn't a comfortable question, but it goes like this. Rayona, what have you done in the last 24 hours to advance the cause of people of color? Nothing. Rayona, what have you done in the last 7 days to advance the cause for people of color, the equality for people of color? Again, maybe something teeny tiny, just because I'm awake and I actually try to do something as often as I remember. But do you understand? You could go decades and never, as a white person, and never do something to advance the cause for people of color. And it wouldn't be mean-spirited. It wouldn't be anything other than you missed that, or you didn't know that that was yours to do, or whatever. So I'm trying to, for myself, reconcile this deep compassion and also live in the humility that it's not just men that don't get it. There's a lot of ways we don't get it. Like there's ways women don't get about how they disempower other women. And unless we're all in the inquiry together, unless we're all curious and fascinated and like, wow, what did I miss today that I didn't know I didn't know? I don't think we can get to this next era. So that's one thing, this thing about being unaware. Second thing is a fear of loss of power. I call it the, why should I compete against 100% of the talent when I only have to compete against 50% now? Right? Why would I do that? But, you know, again, they're not sitting around thinking that. They don't go to the bar and say, hey, let's elbow the women out. Let's just keep it all to ourselves. That doesn't happen. But then we look at the numbers and we go, well, something's happening. They're apathetic. In other words, it doesn't even occur to them. They're focused on whatever they're focused on, their career or their, you know, family, earning money for their families or whatever. It's like they're preoccupied with the few things that they're focused on. So again, no malevolence. And then when they do start to awaken, they're overwhelmed and unsure of what to do. And a lot of the men that we've worked with are in this situation of walking on eggshells. Well, I'm not, should I even, I think she's pregnant. She's 7 months. I think she is, but I'm not sure how to talk about it, and should I bring it up, and if, you know, is that, I better call HR. There's a lot of that, a tremendous amount of that, anxiety. When anxiety goes up, capacity goes down. That's true for everybody. So a lot of that overwhelm and uncertainty lives in the world of being men. By the way, one of the things I've started doing is studying men and masculinity. And there's a great expert on this, guy named Michael Kimmel, Kimmel, Michael Kimmel. If you go on our website, genderpartnership.com, there's a 20-minute TED Talk that he gives about why, you know, men should care about women's equality and so forth. But I just have started studying all these things. And how many of you have sons? Did you raise your hand? Yeah, it is amazing the culture they're growing up in. There's a new documentary out called The Mask We Live In. The Mask We Live In. Even if you just watch the 5-minute trailer, it will rock your world. Because it's an expose into the male culture and what it is for boys in this day and age, and certainly for the men in the room. They grew up in the same culture. It's just now we're awake. And so there's this deep-seated condition that they live in that we don't have a lot of compassion for. So again, we want to, you know, extend as much compassion as we're asking back, but we have to get educated to discover that. So what is it going to take? Well, there's really 3 things that we've found. Now, keep in mind, we've worked with thousands of men and interviewed thousands of men about this and had lots of trainings and educational situations and so forth. It really comes down to 3 things. I'd put them in these buckets. The business case, which Bob appropriately said, why do you have to legislate equality? Shouldn't we be asking the other question, which is what's the benefit of homogeneity? I thought that was great. I'm going to steal that, Bob. But the business case, like understanding how is for your business this the smart thing to do. And in every industry, there isn't any industry that doesn't have women making 80 to 90% of the purchasing decisions for the family. Whether it's the work you do or retail or healthcare, all kinds of things. So there's a very powerful business case to be made, and we need to understand that. So I'm going to say the 3 buckets, and then these things fall within that. The second one is the personal case. So why should I personally care? Well, when we ask men in an audience like this, how many of you have daughters? 2/3 of the room raise their hand in every audience. So there's daughters, there's sisters, there's wives that work outside the home, there's best friends. There's a lot, but if you don't touch the head and the heart, you don't get the transformation. You've got to hit the business case, the personal case, and then the moral case. Men have a very strong kind of code of honor. And when something's not fair, and again you go, how can they not see it's not fair? I'm sorry, friends, they just don't see it. They don't see the inequity. They can look at the statistics and the next day they'll forget it and it won't be ill-intended. It just doesn't happen. So those are the things we have to. And this one about feedback from women they know, love, and respect. So you would be amazed, I think some of you, if you haven't done this, to start engaging the men you work with this issue. They're almost never going to bring it up. Hey, Alice, how was your weekend? Listen, don't you think it's a bummer about women being paid unequally? What do you say we have lunch and talk about it? Not going to happen. Not going to happen. But you say, hey, Brian, how was your weekend? Great, yeah, da-da-da-da-da. Hey, listen, I just saw this study in our industry about pay inequity. Did you know that women only make this much for this and da-da-da? Did you know about that? It's like, no. Yeah, look at this. It's amazing. Hey, what are you doing for lunch? Sit down and talk with them. They actually care. They actually will engage. But I think we've forgotten that we have as much the power of conversation as they do. So I would say it's one of the things we can do is continue to have the conversation because they're probably not likely to bring it up. Now then, there's the 4 C's, the 4 practices that I encourage every group of men and women, and by the way, we do this gender allies, gender partnership work in every industry, and all audiences we give the same assignment, which is the 4 C's. First is compassion. And that's what I talked about earlier about, have compassion that there's things, like you probably didn't do anything for disabled people this week, right? Unless you have someone disabled in your family. You didn't even notice whether the building had ramps or whether the acoustics would be negative for people that are hearing impaired. It's not ill-intended, it's just not on your radar. So that compassion to be human and to be unaware is a really important practice to have. Second one is curiosity. So again, I would really encourage you to get interested in male culture, get interested in the culture of masculinity and what's part of that male experience. My colleague Ben Schick, who's here, Ben's just an amazing partner and truly a gender partner. And he's done 20 years working with men around emotional intelligence and what are the strifes and struggles of being a man in today's society with all the expectations about, for God's sakes, don't do anything pink. Don't let them see you cry. All that stuff that's all the pressure cooker that men grow up in, and then now the, demand to be, 50% partner at home. They get home from work, it's like, I'm done, I'm spent, that's all I got. Some of you are laughing going, yes, that's my husband, okay? Or you say, honey, what are you thinking? They go, nothing. That's true. They're not thinking anything. It's Nothing's happening. A woman's brain at rest is busier than a man's brain at full-blown problem solving. You lay in bed at night and you've got all of the day that just happened, tomorrow, next week, how am I doing on a 10-year plan? They're like, nothing. So, but curiosity about what's that world over there. Third area is courage, so an area of practice. So one of the things I encourage women in particular to do is to offer your CEO or your executives, offer them to convene a truth tellers posse. So you're going to gather a group of 3 or 4 other women that are going to be truth tellers about the culture. Here's how things really are around here. Not just about gender, but about everything. About new initiatives that have been rolled out, or new processes that have been put in place, or how are we doing living the mission, or what's the real word on the street that people say about our firm or stuff. Convene a truth tellers group that they can count on you to get the real deal, because the farther they go up the food chain, the more insulated they are from what's really happening. And that's something you can do. That's a courageous thing you can do. Collaboration, I talked about, finding ways to collaborate with guys in your organization and to invite them to be a part of a brainstorming group, or to create a client review council and make sure that you've got, okay, so I'll bring 2 other women to the table, you bring 2 guys, we'll have a table of 6. Let's have a kind of a standing meeting every 6 weeks or so, and we're going to have that conversation, just so you get in the habit of making sure that you see things through a co-ed lens. So those are some practices. I think one of the previous panelists said this thing about, this is a marathon, not a sprint. So none of your organizations are probably of the size, unless it's a very small firm, that are going to change to a gender partnership culture in less than 5 years. It's just not predictable. It takes, I think somebody said, 7 years in the one firm, and then another one said it took about 20 years to really fully change the culture. You can do it with very focused effort in about 5 years, depending on the size of your firm, but it is this road, it's this unfolding. And you need a couple years of quick wins. So you don't create a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, because the whole world's going to change in less time than that. So if you create a 2-year plan and say, okay, we need quick wins, what are our quick wins going to be? And let's put our stakes in the ground around metrics. What are we going to measure? That can be everything from engagement scores to retention, all kinds of things. But, get those first 2 years of quick wins in, and then just know that it is a windy and twisty road. At the end of the day, it all comes back to you and what you're going to do. So I'm going to end the talk formally with kind of a exercise where I'd like you to pair up at your table. So this next part's going to be a little chaotic. I just ask you to bear with me. I do have one hot tip, and that is the fastest way to quiet a room is to have everybody raise their hand. So when it gets all loud and noisy and chaotic and stuff, at some point I'm going to say, raise your hand. And I'll say it 3 or 4 times, and by the time everyone raises their hand, it'll be stone quiet. So another hot tip to put on your tweeter. Okay, so you're going to get a partner right now, so I'm not going to give you any instructions till you get a partner. So if you don't have a partner, raise your hand and pair up with someone close to you. If you need a partner, raise your hand. There's one. Okay. Anybody doesn't have a partner? If you don't meet your partner, yeah, find somebody else to partner up with. Okay. Okay, now everybody raise your hand. Raise your hand. Isn't that amazing? By the way, if that doesn't work, say raise your hand and close your eyes. Always works. Okay. So there's 3 things that gender partnership requires. First, it requires the answer to the question, why? For the sake of what do I care about this? Why is this important to me? Me personally. What's my skin in the game, what's my raison d'etre, why do I care, why is this important to me? That's one thing. The second thing is, what do I want as an outcome? So what's the finish line or the end result that I want, so that I'm more clear about that? And it could be a big end result or it could be an interim one. But there's got to be a finish line. So we have a why, we have a what, and then we have a how. And the how is, what action am I going to take? And action in this model is almost exclusively conversation, conversational action. So with your partner, this is going to take speed dating to a new level, okay? You're going to say, why is this important to me? What do I want as an end result? And then how am I going to take action? What conversation am I going to have with whom to move my commitment forward? So I might say for my, and you're supposed to do this in 90 seconds each. I gave each 90 seconds each. Okay, so why this is important to me is because I've got this beautiful little granddaughter, and I want her to have a life beyond her wildest dreams and have everything available and equal to make her full contribution. 2, what I want as an outcome is full gender equality at all the leadership tables in every industry and government and academia in the world. That's what I want as an outcome. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to have a conversation with Bob about what I think we can do in the utilities industry to start to transform that area. So that was 90 seconds right there, okay? So that was a sample. All right, so you're each going to get 90 seconds. I'm going to time you on my watch. And then in 90 seconds, I'm going to say switch. That's the other person's turn. And if you didn't follow directions and you're in a threesome, now you're in a hurt locker. Okay, so you're going to have to talk faster. All right, so, the person with the shortest hair goes first. Okay, go ahead. Okay, all right, switch. Long hairs, your turn, long hairs. Okay, all right, go ahead, raise your hand. Everybody raise your hand. Awesome, excellent, very good. Okay, anybody want to shout out some action you're going to take? Something you're going to do based on today's conversation? This is the audience participation part. Use social media more. Excellent. What are you going to use it for? Excellent. To start the conversation. That's right. The only thing that's ever missing is a conversation. Yeah, great. Anybody else? This half of the room you want to be represented?
Share the information.
Share the information. Who specifically would you like to share it with?
As many people as I can.
Okay, great. And you know, I would say there's some of us who are spending our whole life, this is all we're doing. So, you know, everywhere I go, every nook and cranny, etc. For many of you, or most of you, I would say, even if you just tackle the ecosystem you're in, that will make a difference. You don't have to go far and wide and make this your day job or whatever. You actually can do it inside of what you're already doing. I'm not asking anybody to spend more hours in the day. You don't need more hours in the day. But I think it was Mary said in the previous panel, pay very close attention to the kind of conversations you're having. And where you have a chance to make a difference with a male executive, either by appreciating him for seeing something that, you know, you were surprised he saw, which is always good, reinforcement and praise, or by calling something out, like if women are gossiping about another woman, and say, you know what, you guys, let's not have that conversation. Little things like that. It's just little acts of kindness every day will make a difference in the big scheme of things. Okay, so before we get to Q&A, I did want to say this. This is the 1 + 1 = 3. So together we're better than either one of us apart. And sometimes we think that there's someone else who should be doing this. And we do know that one of the critical success factors for change in large organizations is the leadership from the top. And you saw that demonstrated by Bob and Dave. That when you've got leadership at the top, there's no replacement for that, and in many ways it's essential. But there always are early adopters. There's people who get it early, and those are the ones to get after. But we have to remember that we're the ones we've been waiting for. There's no one other than us that's going to change the face of society. And we look at what's happening in the world, especially over in the Middle East and the horrendous genocide that's happening and all that. You know, we said during Hitler's reign we would never let that happen again. And here it is. You know, it's happening. So sometime around now, it's our turn to step up and claim our rightful power in those positions of leadership. So I'm going to ask you to do that and do acts of courage every day. Lisa, can we hear from either the famous iPad or anyone in the room if you have questions, yeah, but, how about, what if, anything about this whole conversation that would be useful more as a dialogue or as Q&A. So either come up to the microphone there, or are they like pinging you? See, they love what we're doing here. It's awesome.
We do have some questions that have been sent in.
Bring them on.
And we've got time for probably a couple of them. Quite a few people wanted to go back to the comment or the fact that when you asked the question about how many women thought they had been undermined by other women, almost everybody raised their hand. But when you asked the question the other way around, how many had they undermined, very few people put up their hand.
Yeah.
Do women not know that they're undermining other women, or are they misinterpreting others as being undermined?
Yeah, they don't see it that way. You know, it's a blind spot. It's just like the men. They don't see that they're unconsciously disadvantaging women during talent reviews. They don't see that when they have two candidates and they're looking at their job descriptions or their resumes or capabilities and stuff, that unconsciously they see a man's name, and then when they go into the salary negotiation, they're going to start with a higher number. Women don't see that. We don't see how we do that to each other. We don't see it. And I believe that if we did, and if it was more conscious, we would stop, because none of us like it. But it is one of those things, one of those blind spots.
Thank you.
And by the way, it's something we don't talk about. Yeah.
I think we have time for just one more question, actually. We've heard several speakers reference the phenomenon of a woman saying something that gets ignored only to be later heard when repeated by a man. I'm curious how much of that might be attributable to the different way that a woman speaks, the different language, and the fact that most leaders speak is currently male.
Yeah, that's really a fantastic call out. So there's a couple things at work here. So one of the things, women, you might not know that happens for men when you ask incessant questions. You know what I'm talking about? Well, what about this? What about that? But how's it, well, yeah, have you thought about this? But what happened? You know, that gets turned into she's tactical, she's not strategic, she's risk avoidant, she's, you know, there's all these conclusions about what that means. It's actually brain science. We are much more contextually oriented. We need to connect the dots. We're not just going to go, they say, we got to take the mountain. Okay, line up which part of the mountain you want me to take. We say things like, well, have you checked the weather patterns? What about soil erosion? Do we know which face of the mountain has the greatest fear of fall? And yet we're very contextual and very holistic and very systemic. So we ask those kinds of questions, but that gets misinterpreted. She's not following the quarterback. She's risk averse, those kinds of things. So that kind of mischief goes on all the time, and we have to start paying attention to it. And we have to educate men that that isn't actually what's going on. That's not why she's asking all those questions, or because she just talks too much. Yes, women have some percentage of more words than men do in the normal course of but because of our brain, the language part of our brain is wired with way more vascular system and way more neurons that actually feed language. So that kind of thing is really important for us to pay attention to, is how are we different and how have we misinterpreted our differences and made up a story about it that we then have turned into unconscious bias. So we all have to get after that, and I would say the more awake we are, the more we can do that. I want to end on a note because yeah, woo, go for it, yes.
What if you don't have another woman at the table to say, hey, Amy, that was your idea.
Yeah.
You stated earlier.
That's right.
Just you.
Yep, that's right. You find a guy who gets it and you ask him to do it. Because there are men who get it. No, there are men who get it, yes. There are men who get it, and if you find them and you say, hey, George, do you ever notice that sometimes women say stuff and nobody hears it, and then a man says it and they do? And he might in the beginning go, wow, I never thought about it. But I say, this week I'd like you to pay attention to it in the meetings that you sit in. He'll come to you at the end of the week, he'll say, oh my God, you're absolutely right. Then you say, George, I want you to be the one that says, if I'm in a meeting and I'm the only woman and I say something that isn't heard, I want you to be the one to come back and say, hey, Gladys, wasn't that you that said that a few minutes ago? Is that what I want you to do that. We do have to do that. We have to ask them. They will step up. But if we don't say anything, they're never going to hear it. Go ahead, follow up.
But the other side of that is say it yourself. And
Well,
then
I was just going to say, can you
Right.
hey, thank you for restating that.
Yeah, yes, if you can do it without bitterness. If you can do it without resentment. But here's the thing.
can you get a guy to validate
It's-
that he's your champion so that when you say that, then you have an ally?
That's right.
That's exactly right, Michelle.
Yeah. So first of all, I would never not use your own voice. I would never not use your own voice. But keep in mind that women get penalized sometimes for saying that, or it's called defensive. When you say, wait, didn't I just say that? Okay, that could get... So to the other lady's point, having someone who's a sponsor, a male ally, a colleague, somebody who is, you know, they know you're a rock star. They know you say good things. They know you think well. Have them have your back. But you literally have to orchestrate it this way, friends. If we remain quiet, nothing's going to change. I am very old. I just turned 64. I have been watching this for 30 years. Nothing's going to change if we don't change it in many of the ways that we talked about. So I just want to say, if any of you are into upgrading your operating system, your leadership effectiveness, we do have training programs that help women do this kind of work, and then we have programs to help men get it and change their ecosystem. So I just want to say, we're your partners for life. Privileged to be here. Thank you. Go ye forth and multiply.